Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're coming to you through the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We can also be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring the magic in our hands. I've always been fascinated by hands, so much so that I could identify anyone I knew by seeing only their hand. I came in sensitive to subtle energy, and I'm sure it was the energy contained in a person's hands that intrigued me more than the hands themselves. As a small child, I would sit for hours holding my palms slightly apart and marveling at the energy I could feel passing between them. When a person would touch me, I could tell if they loved me or meant me ill, no matter their outward demeanor. The touch of some people would actually make me physically sick. It does to this day. That's probably why I became extremely mindful, even as a child, of what passed through my hands to others. On my grandfather's farm, I could approach and touch even the most skittish horse. Little chicks would sleep in my palm. I could pick up a fallen bird and hold it until it rallied and flew away. And inevitably, the sick or wounded animals would seek me out. My Celtic grandmother said I had the touch of the fae. It wasn't until I saw my Lakota teacher treating a lame puppy that I witnessed someone else consciously doing what was spontaneous, if a bit unpredictable for me. "Your hands," I exclaimed, looking at his brown, weathered hands, where he held them on either side of, but not touching the pup's swollen paw. As I watched, I could actually see the swelling disappear. Soon, it romped off on all fours, no longer favoring the limb. "How did you do that?" I had to know. "I bring heaven and earth together in my heart, and let them pass from my right hand to my left. I put the sick part between my hands, and the balanced energy passes through and heals it." For him, that was quite the dissertation. Yet his simple account had granted me the answer to a great mystery, the laying on of hands. Under his tutorage, I later discovered the current was only as powerful as the clarity of the channel. After all, the light is only as clear as the window through which it shines. In order to accomplish the level of healing I'd witnessed my teacher perform, I had to be grounded, centered, calm, and in the present moment. Sounds simple enough, but it's a state few of us ever experience. Soon he showed me how to attune to a sacred herb and offer that frequency to my client through the current. He called them plant helpers, and it wasn't till long after his death I really started to understand. All life is about frequency, and depends on a balance between positive, negative, and neutral to generate itself. Right hand, left hand, heart. If we do nothing but offer a greater level of balance, the body will happily correct itself. To expedite the correction, we can offer a counterbalancing frequency, thus the herbs and intent. In later years, I worked extensively with gemstones, essential oils, and flower essences. I found the more physically familiar I was with them, the better I could call upon their frequency to channel to others through the currents in my hands. I have never reached his level of mastery, yet I'm forever grateful to my old teacher for the magic he placed at my hands. How does this magic interface with the world of science? My guest this hour has blended the esoteric channeling of energy with neurological science in her remarkable healing modality. Susan J. McCROSSIN is the author of Breaking the Learning Barrier, Eradicating ADD, ADHD, and Dyslexia. In 1988, she began studying the links between learning difficulties, stress, neuropressure, and developed a new technique to change the way the brain processes information, known as Crossinology Brain Integration Technique. Susan has advanced degrees in neuroscience and psychology from Swinburne University in Melbourne, Australia, where she conducted detailed research using state-of-the-art EEG brain mapping to help demonstrate how her new techniques were changing the brain. We'll introduce Susan and her amazing work, form Crossinology, after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic.
One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Susan McCROSSIN, author of Breaking the Learning Barrier, Eradicating ADD, ADHD, and Dyslexia, and the developer of Crossinology Brain Integration Technique. Susan, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
It's my pleasure.
I've had the good fortune of witnessing your work, Susan, and I was very surprised that the only tool you appear to use is your hands. What exactly are you channeling through your hands?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I was thinking when you were talking about magic. You know, magic is science that you don't understand yet. Right? There's been a lot of things over the years that people thought were magical until they understood them. Right? So what I'm doing when I work with people is I'm rewiring their brains by using the meridian system, which runs on the outside of the body, as well as I use 3 levels of the aura. There's more levels than that, but I use 3 levels of the aura, and it turns out that that energy body tells the physical body what to do, and there is research that supports that.
So how does this change the neurological wiring of your clients?
So it's a lot like coming into the house and the lights don't go on and you go out to the circuit board and just to flick the circuit breakers back on, and magically the lights go on and all the power comes back. So it's very similar to that in the brain, in that if you have a learning difficulty, you have some parts of your brain that are inactive as far as doing different tasks, and part of my brain scanning research to get my neuroscience degree showed that. So, for instance, someone who's has a learning difficulty doesn't ever become active in the frontal lobes when they do a decision-making task, the moment that they make a decision. Whereas normal people who are not having a learning problem, that's frontal lobes is where you do your thinking, and that's how you make your decision. And they still make decisions, but they don't do it in the same way as someone who's organized neurologically normally. And so then they're often reactive, or they, do a reaction without thinking first or whatever. So it really does change what the activity in the brain is, even in a scan.
Does the person that can't access that decision-making ability, do they have to do a bunch of workarounds in order to make a decision?
Yeah, yes. In the past they have been. Well, they're often reactive, and you see it in children and adults where they, like the temperamental chef that gets upset and walks out on a full restaurant at night, not thinking about tomorrow and that maybe he may not have a job anymore. So they're in the moment and they don't think about the consequences, and so it's hard for them to analyze how they should respond and how it would affect others. And so, they're very difficult as children. Often they're noticed, in school because they're a nuisance. So, that type of learning difficulty is the most obvious, and that's ADD, ADHD.
How do you know what to do to affect the corrections you need on an individual basis?
So I've developed about 80 steps that when your brain's working at its optimum, you are doing, none of them would be disconnected, if you like. So people come in, they fill out a checklist, so I've got an idea where I'm going to go. But then I go through every single step and I make sure that it's connected in the way that it should be. And by the time we finish them all, function comes back online and they can't ever remember having a problem.
Is there an integration time or is it instantaneous?
It's an interchange. So it takes about 6 to 8 hours on average, depending how many problems I have to correct. And I assess them beforehand. I'm looking at reading comprehension, something that's called digit span, which is a standard sub-test on the WISC, which is a very common test for learning difficulties and your ability to do well at school. And so I make those assessments in the beginning. I look at their vestibular system, coordination, then I do all the work over several hours, over a couple of days or 3 days, depends on the age of the client, and then reassess. And they should all be normal. If they're not, then I haven't finished. When they're all totally normal and they can function easily, then we're done. And they go off into life and have a good experience.
Do you find that they'll backslide any out of habit, or is it just pretty much a done deal?
No, it's a bit like having a broken leg and you fix it, and then when it's fixed, you're not going to, you're just going to walk on it. Because it's there, you walk on it. You don't even think about it. In fact, my puppy just tore a cruciate ligament about 5 days ago, and he's starting to walk on it already, because it's starting to heal and that sort of thing. If it's available to use, you will use it.
And so, do you consider your work as a blend between shamanism and science?
Yeah. I don't call myself a shaman.
Slipped that one in on you, didn't I?
So I'm definitely doing energetic healing, but I don't do soul journeys like you do, right? But I can go into so I use muscle testing to get information, and the muscles are controlled by the subconscious mind. So I can find out anything, what the trauma is. I can go deep into the amygdala where we store all the major trauma that's happened in our life, and we have no conscious access to it. In fact, the only other way I know in there is, like hypnosis, and not everybody is hypnotizable, but I can go out and take the trauma of any event out so that you still have the memory of the event, but you have no emotional connection with it anymore. And it's only ever the emotional connection that makes it bad. So, PTSD, that sort of thing, and the parts of the brain that are shut down when you're having learning difficulty actually became shut down because there was a trauma. And usually it's very early in life and you have no memory of it. And it could be something that's irrelevant to an adult. It could be a move. When you're a very small child and you move, things change, things are different. Or somebody goes to hospital, one of the caregivers goes to hospital for a while or a few days or a few weeks. It's a big trauma to a small child who doesn't really understand yet. So it doesn't have to be anything that the adult would consider a big deal. Or the birth of the sibling. So the commonest child I see is the eldest male. And if the sibling was born before the first child was in preschool, they just notice that the attention has gone off them, because you can't pay as much attention as you used to the first child when you've got a second child. And that's a very common thing, that the person shuts their brain down as an adaptation to the stress.
Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about muscle testing for those of them that don't understand what that is?
Okay, so if we can use any muscle really, but because I'm working with people for a few hours, I lay them on a massage table, so it's convenient for me to use the front of the shoulder. So the big deltoid muscle on the shoulder, I use the front of it, which is called the anterior deltoid, so they can lie on a table and I can just bring their arm up at about 45 degrees. Now, the muscle response is controlled by the subconscious. So while I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm sitting down and I've got 600 to 800 muscles in various states of contraction. I don't have to think about that because that's an automatic process. And you don't ever think about your muscles until they hurt or until they're not working. You get some kind of injury. So that link from the muscle testing into the subconscious now allows me, by touching points on the body, and they're all acupuncture points, but I don't use needles, I'm just touching them, So in those with combinations, and then modes, which are Indian mudras, so holding, the thumb pad on some part of one of the other fingers. And if you ever look at a picture of the Buddha meditating, he's got his thumb touching, either the ring finger or the index finger, one of them, and they mean things. And they connect the meridians together in ways that they don't normally correct. So I'm able to very specifically go in and find out what is happening in the lateral hypothalamic nuclei, controlling how the pupils open and close. And the muscle testing gives me the response because I'm touching points and holding modes and asking complicated electrical sentences, if you like, to find out, much like the electrician comes and puts the two little clamps on the wires to see if the current's running through. I'm doing the same thing with muscle testing and mudras and points.
So if you're holding these mudras and points and you get a negative response, in other words, the muscle testing comes up negative, you know that you have a block? Yep. Is that what you're doing there?
Exactly. And then I hold that, and it's complicated to explain, but I hold that in my proprioceptors of my hips, because we have proprioceptors in our joints that tell us where our limbs are, and we kind of hold it as an electrical imbalance. And then I do a gentle, what's called a frontal occipital hold. So I've got one hand at the base of the skull and the other on the forehead, and I wait for a pulse. So I'm instructing them what to do with their energy, and they're making the change. And so
as I understand this, Susan, what you're actually doing is holding the imbalance within your personal body in order to offer the correction?
That's right. I don't take it on, I just hold it. All right? So I don't take on other people's energy, so I'm careful to protect myself. That's where a bit of the shamanism comes in. To make sure
sneaks right in there, doesn't it?
I got enough of my own junk. I don't need to take on other people's junk.
So, Susan, do you work with many indigo, rainbow, or crystal children?
I would say yes. I'm not really sure how to differentiate, but I'm aware of the indigo children, and I do see indigo children. I don't say anything to the parents because a lot of my clients come sort of from mainstream, and so I'm... what do they say? A sane. The difference between a sane and an insane person is that a sane person knows who to tell their experiences to.
I love that.
That was a psychiatrist friend of mine told me that, and I think that's true. So if the person's open, I'll tell them exactly what's going on, right? But
right.
If it's a challenge for their belief system, I'll put it in terms they can understand.
And yet, it's not a lie. It's simply framing it in a way that a person can understand and utilize.
Exactly, and take it in, right? Because, if I go to as I point out to people, if I go to the New Guinea highlands and take a picture of someone with a Polaroid camera and they see this image of them on a piece of paper, they're going to think you've taken a picture of their soul, right?
Exactly.
We know that somehow chemicals and light make this image. We may not know exactly how it happens, but we know it's not magic. And that's that whole thing with magic. Once you understand it, it's not magical. This is a repeatable technique that I can train other people to do. I've got about 80 people trained. They get the same results. And that's not, I'm not the white witch.
Oh, you're disappointing me. Here, I thought you had magic in your hands. So the difference between magic and science is simply understanding how the magic works. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the mechanism. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's how gone all through science, hasn't it? If you just look at the history of what we've discovered over the eons and science and discovering things and how the mechanisms work, and when you study electricity, you learn about little electrons, negative electrons, little E minuses running down a wire. There's no E minuses running down a wire. It's just a model. We don't really know what electricity is. We just know how to manipulate it.
Isn't that about the truth with all science? We don't know exactly what it is. We're learning how to manipulate it, and that gives us a feeling of power over it.
Well, exactly. And if we can use it in some way, then it's helpful. So.
Fascinating.
Just because we don't understand it doesn't make it make it not valid.
We're going to have to take a short break here, Susan. We will return to our discussion with Sue McCROSSIN after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Want to hear more? Our innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our special guest this hour is Susan McCROSSIN, the author of Breaking the Learning Barrier, Eradicating ADD, ADHD, and Dyslexia. Her website is www.crossinology.com. That's www.crossinology.com. Welcome back, Susan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, I've always been amazed at how many children who have trouble in school are so readily labeled as ADD with hyperactivity and given Ritalin. I read your academic paper describing the research to date on the effectiveness of such medication, and it appears there have been very few studies showing enhanced academic performance, and yet it's prescribed copiously and readily. Can you comment on this, Susan?
Well, that's all they have, right? So that you take a child to the doctor or to a psychiatrist, their whole training is about diagnosis of prescriptions. So that's the model they have. They don't learn about nutrition. They don't. And I don't think they ever talk to parents about food additives. And a lot of the ADD kids are very susceptible, especially to tartrazine, the orange food dye. And then there's a lot of families putting them on. If you go into the supermarket and you buy a cereal in a box, it's got sugar in it, right? And so sugar makes them more active, and they're even more susceptible to it, the ADD kids. And so you just rev them up, and then you send them to school, and they're supposed to sit still, and it's driving the teacher nuts. And that's just a basic approach. But yes, when I did the research, that dates back to, I think it was 1927, to the Charles Bradley School for Sick Children. And there were kids with multiple personality disorder and they'd have to hold them down to give them the medication. And then there were only about 18 studies. I didn't have to read that many. Then it wasn't until the 70s that they brought in, double-blind, placebo-controlled type studies. But they never checked for compliance by doing urine tests on them to make sure they were actually taking it. And all the way through, pretty much, they were still 2 years behind their peers when they came out of school, but they weren't such a nuisance in class. They were quieter. So that was the main thing. And, that's one way of doing it, is to just kind of, slow them down so they're not so active. If we still lived in a tribal society, it would be totally irrelevant. They'd be jumping on a horse and racing off, getting the buffalo, all that sort of thing. And they'd be great at it. But we now expect it. And so I see more boys than girls, that's for sure. And we expect them to sit still for long periods of time, which is not really reasonable.
Yeah, I remember my son came home from school from the second grade, and he said, "Mom, I've decided I'm not going back to school." And I said, "Well, do tell, son." He says, "All they do is make you sit still all day, tell you lies, and expect you to memorize them."
That's great. That's pretty accurate, actually.
Very accurate. That was the second grade. He's been a handful. So, Susan, do you educate people on nutrition when you're also helping them with their ADD, ADHD children?
Somewhat. Living near Boulder, it's not so bad. I'd say that most of the kids I see have got pretty good nutrition. But yeah, it is important. And also, boys are more active than girls. You just got to watch them when they're small and playing, and they've finally discovered that sort of the activity level in the brain is higher than girls, and they need to be active and running around and, not sitting in little circles, crocheting or something. It's just not going to work for them. So they get noticed more, right, school. So I went through school with a learning problem, and I wasn't noticed because I was quiet. And so, Australia, my school reports were full of, Susan could do much better if she tried harder, not understanding that I was trying as hard as I could, right? So Australia has, and I'm not sure what Canada does, but Australia has the British system, the European system, where after 12 years of school, you sit for one set of state-run final exams, and that's your high school grade and your university entrance score. So there's no GPA from your schoolwork. And I didn't get anything less than an A- in my final year. And I was considered a good student, So there I go, sit these big exams in the big exhibition buildings, and I failed ancient Greek history, which has never really held me back in life. But that was a technical fail for high school. No summer school. I would have had to repeat the entire year again. And they'd take 10% of the mark off if you're coming through a second time. And so I luckily had a scholarship from year 10 based on this so-called IQ test, which are the little rotating the pattern and working out which one comes next or how many dots or whatever. And I happen to be very good at those. And so I rank in the top 3% of the population for those tests. I'm not sure how they help you anywhere in life, but that, and combined with a letter from the careers advisor at school, enabled me to get into a technical college and study industrial design. And I managed to pass the first year of that at least, and then I sort of fell into computing as I described it. And it turned out that, so you've got two sides of your brain. You've got a creative side and you've got a logical side. Well, I was all logic. I'd shut down my creative emotional side because my father went away for about 6 months when I was little. And so I ended up working with computers, men and computers. They don't want to talk about their feelings. So I found a niche for myself, right? And I did that for a long time until I decided I wanted to do something more humanitarian in nature. So, you can be successful in life without having your full access to your brain, but gosh, it's a whole lot easier when you do have access. And you don't lose any of your creativity or anything, because that's a fear that some ADD people have. No, you're just able to stay on task and finish things. There's a concept.
What a concept. Your work has been proven very effective in the treatment of learning disorders, and yet I've witnessed it also correcting phobias, obsessive thoughts, and closed head injuries. Would you speak to these benefits of Crossinology and how they're achieved?
I do, yes. Because I can get deep into the amygdala, it kind of, it's interesting because they're more of a variable than the straight-up ADD, ADHD, dyslexia. But, trauma, I can go into the deep brain centers and take the emotional content out, as I said before. And so also the repetitive thoughts can come from not enough logic, but then sometimes, there could be a psychiatric disorder in there as well, and I don't fix psychiatric disorders, but that would be more of your area, I would think, in the shamanistic area. But I do commonly get a ADD bipolar diagnosis. Now, I think if you're going through the Western education system and you've got a long learning problem, you've got every right to get depressed, right? Because you're not doing well, you're criticizing your work, your homework's not good enough, you study for the test and then you don't get a good grade. So usually all I do is I correct the learning difficulty, but I also do their attitudes, and their attitudes to school because they're already jaded. So my hardest is like the 16-year-old who won't even open a book. I can't motivate people, but if I can get them younger, where they're still trying, then they just sort of take off, and the bipolar diagnosis goes away. And I don't really think they were bipolar. Actually, I just think anyone would be depressed if they were having a learning problem these days.
Absolutely. I mean, if so much of your time is spent in school and you have a learning disability that is affecting your performance there, your self-esteem takes a big hit. Are you able to help with self-esteem as well, Susan?
Oh, absolutely. That's the first thing I go to is the self-esteem. Because the other thing is they give you homework, and there's the teacher handing out, sheets of things you've got to fill out or whatever, and fill in the numbers. And, the non-learning difficulty kid can do it in half an hour, and the learning difficulty kid is doing taking 2 hours. So to be at school all day and then come home and do another couple of hours, I tell the parents, I'm like, make sure he understands the concept and then help him to get it done, and get it done in half an hour. Because you don't want to, Voltaire said, education's about lighting a flame, not filling a vessel. And just vessel filling, I get little kids who've memorized their times tables for math, they don't even know what they mean. Right? So they've just memorized something that it's just, it's meaningless, this memorization stuff, right? But, there are some things, and so even I had lots of trouble memorizing, and so I had compensations. I had 2 auditory sounds for spelling words, because I didn't know people were seeing pictures in their head. So, business is how you say it, and bussiness is how you spell it. Friend is how you say it. Fry end is how you spell it, and I did that for every word. And then my times tables, I just calculated them really fast, and I'm really strong in math, but I never had my tables memorized. But the education system is written by people who can do it, and the teachers can do it. So they don't understand what the problem is. And then the people, and then with a psych degree, because I have a psych degree, you don't learn enough about the brain to fill the back of a postage stamp. And then the neuroscience degree that I have, you learn about the brain, but you're looking at damage. You're not looking at learning. So you've got people who don't know about the brain designing the education system, and the people who do know about it aren't interested, unless they get a head injury from football or something.
That's really interesting that you say that, Susan, because what I've found is people that are really, really, really good at memorizing things don't tend to display as much creativity as those that do exactly what you were talking about, is find ways of getting the answer in any given moment rather than having to store it in the brain.
That's a very good way of saying they're not as smart. I agree with you.
We're going to have to take another break here, Susan. We'll be back on the flip side of this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Our theme song, One People, One Nation, is from the Winds of Time album by my musical group Starfire. It can be found on iTunes.com, cdbaby.com, Amazon.com, and my website, gwildawiyaka.com. Catch you on the flip side. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our very special guest this hour is Susan McCROSSIN, the author of Breaking the Learning Barrier, Eradicating ADD, ADHD, and Dyslexia. Her website, www.crossinology.com. That's www.crossinology.com. Welcome back, Susan.
Thank you.
Right. Susan, you have a Center for Therapy and Training in Brain Integration called the Learning Enhancement Center, LEC, in Berthoud, Colorado. Could you tell our listeners about your center and what you do there?
So, yes, I work in private practice, as far as treating people, but I also train people, and I actually use the Best Western in Boulder to do it because they have a very nice facility there, and they're great people. But I teach classes, and I teach, a 4-day pre-training because I need to teach them how to muscle test and how to make a correction, and we cover things like, balancing the chakras, the meridians, getting rid of allergies, basic, I'm doing emotional corrections, there's plenty you can do on people in 4 days, and they all practice on each other, so they get some skills, and then they have to do 60 hours of case studies that they then send to me. They work on their family and friends, and then there's a 2-week training to actually do the brain integration work, and that has to be repeated. They repeat it at half price because nobody gets all the material the first time through. It's quite complex. And then they have to do 10 completed learning difficulty case studies, and then they're certified and they're on the website. So, that's the bulk of my work is training other people how to do this.
That's amazing because, I have to tell you, your work is very profound and very needed in the world, and the only way to do it is to make more than one of you. Susan, how
Exactly.
on earth, or in heaven, did you figure out this modality?
Well, it's interesting because we started with exercises, brain gym and educational kinesiology, and we found that if we took like 10 kids, 3 would change and change profoundly, and another 3 or 4 would change while you worked on them and then regress, and another 3 or so wouldn't change at all. And so, we started doing different things. There was a guy called Richard Utt in Arizona who was a kinesiologist, because that's what muscle testing's called, and he was the only guy that had the model that you could make a permanent change, rather than just holding a point or doing a subluxation in the spine or something and then having to come back the next week and have it done again. So using that model, but he didn't address learning difficulties, we started, fiddling around with things, and we were giving a talk one time in Melbourne, and a child psychologist heard us speak and said, look, I don't know what you do, but what you're saying kind of makes some sense to me. I'm going to send you my last resort children that I've been working on for at least 2 years, and I've had no change at all. And if you can do any change at all, I'll consider it a success. So she sends this boy, who's about 15, who's very creative in setting fires to the lockers at school and being disruptive in class, and they're about to expel him because he's such a pain in the butt, right? And so we work on him, and we're just developing it still, and I still had a full-time job, and, we're doing it part-time and stuff. So about 4 months later, and she was looking for any change at all, just the slightest, because she'd done nothing in 2 years with him. And he goes back, and he's first in his class in English, second in math, captain of the football team, totally transformed. And she was so blown away that she ended up sending us lots of kids, and she was able to give us feedback about what changed and what didn't, so we could refine it. And she was sitting them for the WISC, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, and that thing's been used for about 80 or 90 years, because it's a very good, it's not a measure of IQ, but they do presume to come out with a number and tell you what your IQ is. But it is a good predictor of how well you'll do in school. And you don't change, in all the 80 or 90 years I've been using it, you don't change in your ranking on a WISC, like it's percentile ranking in your own age group in your lifetime. And we were quadrupling and 5-timesing their scores. So she was completely blown away and sent us all her learning difficulty kids and stuff. And then she could still do the work with the parents, because they still need to be parented. And you get parents, if you get, good cop, bad cop type parent situation, the kid learns how to get around things and how not to, to avoid doing the things they don't want to do because one parent's weak or soft or whatever. And, I think that's one of the stricter things I have to be with parents. I'm going, you need to both be on the same page. You never argue at home when the kids are at home, right? And you need to have the same rules in the house. And it's whether it's puppies or it's kids, it's rules, limitations, consistency. And when you do that, and they're integrated as well, they learn very quickly that, this doesn't work anymore, I can't do this behavior. And they don't even, they're not as emotional anymore, so they're not likely to have meltdowns. And then if they're on medication, it tends to bring them down too much, so they just walk around like zombies. So often the parent ends up, titering off the medication, and they don't really need it anymore.
That's fantastic. Susan, would you mind telling our listeners where they can find your book, the trainings, and the healing services you offer?
It's all on the website that you mentioned before, www.Crossinology. And it's my name, McCROSSIN, with the Mac taken off, so it's CROSSINOLOGY.com, and it's all available there. You can order the book. It says print on demand.
Fantastic. And when does your next classes start up?
I have a pre-training in March, and I have the big training at the end of this month. So most people, take about 3 to 6 months to get their case studies done before they come in for the next one. So, people are coming in now for the pre-training in March. Sending me
That's
emails.
great.
Can I still get in?
The Learning Enhancement Center works in conjunction with teachers, tutors, psychologists, and health professionals. I find that really remarkable. What do you think the most instrumental thing is in getting your work accepted into the mainstream?
It's a little tricky. I'm just looking now at doing something with a school in Indiana, because I've already worked on some kids there and they're blown away, and they're a small school, a private school, and so they want to get all the kids help. So I said, if you're smart, you'll train one of your people, and then if they can do all the kids. So we're looking at doing that now and getting some exposure for it, through a school. But I don't really want to hand the work over to schools. I mean, I still want to train the individuals that do the work, because you don't want it watered down or changed in some way, and then it's not effective, and then it gives you a bad name, right?
Exactly.
So I'm pretty strict about the training.
So have you trained some teachers so that you can spread yourself even on that frontier?
Yeah, I've got, as a matter of fact, I have 2 in training right now. Yes, 2 of the smart ones. I have one girl, and she had a learning problem, because I make people get integrated by somebody, one of my practitioners, before they come in. Otherwise, everybody's ripping their hair out because they can't keep up, right? And so, anyway, she came into the class, and I happened to have some people who hadn't been integrated. If she wasn't in the class, I wouldn't have known that I said it, because so many people asked me the same thing I just said, right? And I thought, did I not say it or something? And then she's sitting right in front of me going, yeah, you already said that. I'm like, okay, I'm not going crazy. So that's why she's a teacher in training, right? Because she really picked it up and she understands it. And you've got to be in practice for about 10 years, and you have to understand what you're doing, because then you're not going to make changes, because you know why every step is absolutely critical.
Yeah, not only critical, but being able to have embodied it is the only way you're going to be able to teach it, I would think, because it seems so different from any other modality. Is that what you're experiencing?
Yes, I would totally agree with that. Yes. It's every now and then I get someone who thinks that even with my 30 years that they know better and they're going to change the sequence, and I just don't certify them. And some people, they're not suitable for it, Either they don't have the intellectual capacity, or sometimes I've had a couple of guys that were kind of creepy that no one wanted to work with, and I'm like, I'm not certifying you if the women in the class are finding
We're done, huh? Susan, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic and the beautiful service you brought into your world and through this remarkable forum. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to this and our other thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love, and do remember, we all have magic in our hands.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation.